So, if you have a solid understanding of psychology and influence and persuasion, you'll have a huge advantage over other marketers. It's a mixture of science and art, and when you put it to use, you're able to connect and engage with customers at a much higher level and with much greater effect. Make no mistake, if you're able to influence and persuade more effectively than your competitors, the customer will end up buying your product or service and will be ever more likely to stay with you as a loyal customer from then on. Naturally, you'll use these techniques ethically as they are powerful, and on the show today, we'll look into the 10 hottest psychology concepts out there right now for you to level up your B2B marketing. Hello, good afternoon. My name's James Rostance, and this is the 414 live and exclusive to LinkedIn Live each and every Thursday. The show is for you if you're a professional B2B marketer, or whether you work in-house at an agency or at a company, or indeed if you're a sales and marketing executive with oversight for your company's sales endeavors. So the idea of the show is that each and every week you get to expand and enhance your professional knowledge as I speak with some of the greatest and most interesting minds in B2B marketing. And this week we're going to be delving into the world of psychology, persuasion and influence. And joining me live from all the way over in Belfast, please welcome Mr. David Mead.
James, thank you so much for having me. I've been watching the 414 for a long time and I am delighted to be your guest.
Thank you so much. And I thought just for you that I deliberately made possibly the biggest mess up of starting the show I've ever done.
Oh, don't worry. I can assure you these technical things, it happens all the time, doesn't it? We're all weary with WebEx, tired of Teams, Zoom zonked, so we're going to get along just fine.
Kid. Oh man, that was painful. But we pulled it back around. But thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. So we've got a huge topic to look into, but for the benefit of the viewers, could you give a bit of background as to why you are particularly well suited to help us through this mystical world of psychology and influence?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating space, and any professional, whether you're a marketer or a salesperson of any kind, if you're not using the proven psychology of influence and persuasion to nudge your clients' leads and prospects in the right direction, then I can assure you, you are leaving money and opportunities on the table. There is a hard science behind how we achieve and hear the word yes more often, and that is what most of my work is today. I teach organizations and individuals how to get the people around them to move closer in their direction. So of course, for marketers and sales professionals, that typically tends to be leads of some sort, but even people in the charity sector, those in the third sector, I teach them how to hear the word yes more often, whether it's a client or a colleague, whether it's someone to your left or to your right, whether that left or right is in your office or at this point on a Zoom call. And the science behind it is simple, easy, and its ethical application will transform the way that your business works. It really will. I genuinely believe that the only way is ethics. It's one of my most favorite puns ever. Yeah. So it's really important that all of these principles and tools and techniques are used carefully. But all of my work comes from being an academic. My primary career was as a researcher into the characteristics of high-performing teams and organizations. So I looked at things like decision making. What is it that makes a great decision? One that you and your colleagues can stand by, not only at the point at which you make it, but across the entire life of that decision, because decisions are the oxygen of great teams, individuals and organizations. And if people aren't making and taking them all the time, they're already starting to slow down. Now the challenge is, in this moment, James, most customers are slowing down their decision making process. They're doing that because in times of change and uncertainty, they don't like to say yes to too many things. It seems like a terrifying overinvestment in the things that matter to them. And that's what leads to that CC mentality. When you take a tiny little decision and CC everyone in the Western Hemisphere, so that 9 months from now, if it comes to bite you in the backside, you can say, well, hold on, I CC'd you about that at the time and you didn't get back to me. So my job is to look at the role of persuasion in hearing that word yes more often. So as a researcher, I looked at it academically. And then in Ireland, I developed a TV show on the BBC, which started about 8 years ago now. And for anyone watching the 414, if you haven't seen my TV show, I want you to know that that is deeply offensive to me. Watched by nearly 12 people every single week, so kind of a big deal in Belfast. And in the show, I play the part of a mentalist or a mind reader. It looks like I can crawl inside your head and guess PIN numbers and bank account details, but don't worry, James, you are safe. It is all based on the proven psychology of science and persuasion. And today, most of my work is working with organizations like Apple and Harvard, PwC, Cabinet Office, Google. I teach them how to use these skills to get better results.
Wow! See, I thank you for doing that, because it's really important that viewers and listeners to the show understand why you're good at this. In fact, good, that's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? But our wonderful topic for today is what the top 10 hottest psychology concepts to level up your B2B marketing. And promise to the viewers right now is if you set about implementing even one, you will experience an uplift in your results and ultimately sales, because that's what we're here to do. So with that said, what do you see as being number 10 in your top 10 list of psychological techniques?
Yeah, well, I absolutely hope we get through them all. I really do. But the first thing that we need to say, I think, for context is that for us as marketers, as communicators, as salespeople, the way that we are connecting with the people around us has now fundamentally changed. Our job is to take this new space within which we are communicating, talking about our products and our services, and use it to its best advantage. So how do we take the tiny little window within which we all operate at the moment and maximize every word in our communication to get the best results? Well, one principle that I find really works well, I refer to it as the David and Goliath principle. Other researchers have referred to it as the contrast principle, as the comparison principle, but it's one that really will skyrocket your likelihood of getting that word yes the next time. And one of the original researchers that looked at it was a guy called Robert Cialdini, and in his work he followed salespeople around professionally, and one of those individuals, one of those sectors that he embedded himself in for a long period of time was real estate in the United States. And what fascinated him was when someone was bringing around a customer to look at various houses, they often started with 2 or 3 or 4 terrible places that they knew didn't fit the criteria of the customer, didn't have enough rooms, didn't have enough outside space, wasn't the quality of the neighbourhood that they had requested. And at this point, Robert was asking them, why on earth are you taking the time to show them around these properties that you know that they will not like? Well, the reason he did that was because he knew when he got to the properties that were kind of close to what they like, in comparison, in contrast, it looked like it was far more interesting and far more attractive. And there are so many different ways that we can test this. For those of you watching at home now, let us know inside the comments. I'd like you to look at these 2 boxes, one on the top, one on the bottom. Which one looks darker to you? Do you think it's the one on the top? Do you think it's the one on the bottom? As you're watching, do let us know inside the comments and we'll be able to take a look back at them afterwards. But actually, the truth is, they are both identical. And if we just obscure this middle point, if we obscure the horizon, James, you'll see that the only thing that's changing is the context. And this is the power of this extraordinary principle. Now, for those of you who have done physics classes at school, you will almost certainly remember this really simple experiment. My physics teacher, Mr. Boyle, who ironically, James, did actually have a boil. He used to have 3 buckets in the class, and one on the right-hand side had really warm water in it. Now, not scalding, not boiling hot, but it was pretty darn warm. On the one on the other side had pretty cold water in it, not freezing, it certainly wouldn't hurt your hand, and in the middle bucket, it was around room temperature. He would have us place our hands into the exterior buckets first, James, and just acclimatise to that temperature for a little while, and once we had done that, he would have us plunge our hands right into the central bucket. Now, when he did that, when he instructed us to do so, the hand that had been in the coldish bucket, when it went into the middle, it felt like our hand was getting scalded, it was boiling hot, whereas the opposite was true. If our hand had been in the warmish bucket and then went into the one in the centre, then all of a sudden it felt like it was absolutely freezing. If you had a little hangnail, it felt like it was in agony. Now, why is this the case? It's because every decision that we make, every purchase that we make, that is decided, James, by the experience, the stimuli, the scenario that we have embraced or experienced just before we make that buying decision. I call it David and Goliath because it is about comparing two different models, two different experiences. Cialdini calls it the contrast principle, and he truly is the father of this and many of the psychological principles that we will look at in this episode. Others call it the comparison principle, but it is so powerful. And I can give you one example, James, if you're interested, of a client that we've used this with that absolutely skyrocketed their sales by just over 400%. Now, who wouldn't want to increase their sales by that much?
Exactly. And you know what? I was just about to ask, how can this be applied in the real world? So how did you do that?
Well, I love flying, and I do it. I used to do it almost every day before there was this tiny little pandemic that you might have heard about. I don't know about you. This is my favorite pandemic, or at least it's definitely in my top 3. And in January and February. January, I think I had 28 flights. In February, I had 26 flights. So I spend a huge amount of time in airports, and they fascinate me because almost every penny that we spend there is discretionary. When we arrive at that airport, we didn't intend to spend the money that we do. Broadly speaking, we can just get on to our flight and go. American layovers are a great example of this. If I arrive into JFK, James, and maybe have 4 hours until my connecting flight to LAX, what am I going to do with that time? And I was fascinated in particular by spas. Now, these spas are pretty profitable outlets, generally speaking, and one of their most profitable treatments is the hot stone massage. Now, one of these organizations approached me and my team because they weren't really selling enough of the hot stone massage, and the reason it was incredibly profitable is because there were almost no fixed costs with it. It was only variable. In other words, it only costs them money when a customer pays them to get it delivered. And if you haven't had one before, you arrive into this little booth, they lie you down on the table, they slather you with oil, they heat some stones, put them on your back, they put on some whale music, absolutely blissful. And it's so profitable because they do this 4 times in a row, and by the time person number 4 is done, it's time to clean up and chuck person number 1. But it wasn't selling enough. It was around $99 per treatment. So what we did was we created an all-singing, all-dancing platinum version. It was $199, but in this case you got a CD. You remember those historical documents? You got a CD of the whale music to take home so you can ruin an evening at home as well. You got a souvenir rock that you could take with you that would allow you to heat it up and perhaps do that at home as well. And you also got a little vial of the essential oil. Now, I want to be clear. I'm in my late 30s. I've got this far without any of this essential oil, James. So this oil is not essential. They're lying to us. But anyway, when someone came into the spa, they were told that this treatment was $199. And the employees were trained to wait for that moment of a sharp intake of breath. And then whenever they realised that the customer was never going to spend that amount of money, they came back in and said, oh, well, look, if that's a little too expensive, you can have exactly the same treatment, but without the giveaways. So you won't get the CD, you won't get the essential oils, and you won't get the rock. You'll have exactly the same relaxing, immersive experience, but it's only $99. And at this point, many more people said yes. The sales of that product increased by over 400%. Now, why is that the case? Because of this David and Goliath model. Comparing big with small makes the small seem ever more value driven and ever more impactful. And if you are pitching to a B2B business, if you are selling your services as a marketer, whether you're on the agency side or even trying to get that elusive stakeholder inside your business to simply say yes to something, then the easiest thing that you can do is have 2 options. One big, one small. Make sure the big one is really big. Make sure that it's ambitious, but also make sure that it does actually align with where you're going as an individual and as an organization, because in some cases they will definitely say yes to that. So it's important that you make sure that it is something you do actually want, but always have a little small version that you can retreat to. Now, James, a good example of this might be you might pitch for a 5-year contract or piece of work or a retainer with a client. That might be your big ask first off. And if you see that sharp intake of breath where they go, ooh, well then why don't you recommend straight away in the room a 6-month or 12-month taster? Because that will seem ever more attractive, ever more valuable, and more accessible from a pricing and experimentation point of view. So always, always, always make sure that you have a smaller alternative ready to go. The quote that I always remember around this is, if you retreat in the moment, you win. If you retreat from the moment, you lose. And James, I'm sure you will have seen this before. If a client gives you feedback and says that, oh, well, look, your work is a little too expensive, I don't think we can invest that much, what is it that people typically do? They typically say, oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I know, look, let me go back to the office. Let me speak to the team. Let me see if we can reimagine this, if we can reskin it. Let's see if we can cut away some of the fat and get you a better price. They do that because they want to protect their price integrity, and I can understand that. They know that they shouldn't be able to discount immediately, or that might undervalue your offering in perceptually with the customer. However, we know if you do that, you lose energy in the relationship, rapport, momentum, and you give that customer time to talk to other providers. So make sure that you have a more piecemeal, more milestone, smaller version ready to go inside the room to make sure that you can, to make sure that you've got another option. James, it's a really simple technique, and I'm certain there's many applications that our viewers will be able to apply.
I like that. David and Goliath. Okay. I have heard of something similar actually with handbags. Actually, I'm not a big handbag buyer myself, but
I mean, I am.
You are. Yes, the concept of Gucci Do It, where they have in the window, is it like a £20,000 handbag in the middle, and then a 10 and a 5, and the idea being that when walking past, the £20,000 one makes the £5,000 one look an absolute bargain, right? Or 10,000 if you're wanting to go midway.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is ultimately they're I suppose principle number one is that David and Goliath principle, and I would encourage everyone to look up Robert Cialdini's work. But there is a second principle that we could look at alongside that, is the rule of 3. So let's I hadn't intended to make this one number 9, but let's look at it, because as human beings we must accept that we all think in 3s. James, the whole world is divided into 3s. Something special happens when 3 pieces of information are presented to us, because the whole world is spaced into 3s. It allows us to rank things as good, better, best, top, middle, bottom. And think of all of the examples of this: gold, silver, bronze, 1, 2, 3, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. I'm Irish, what can I say? When things are divided in 3, it's easy for our customer's brain to rank them. They can see where they sit and where they fall. However, the minute that a 4th one is introduced, then the brain needs to create a matrix, and it's much harder for us to judge the value and the merit of a product or a solution. So always reflect on the rule of 3 wherever possible. Things that are in 3s are so much easier for us to process and ultimately make decisions on.
I really like that, especially actually. That reminds me of the adage, was it a confused mind always says no.
We make 70 practical and depth decisions a day. Now, we make hundreds of small decisions, but we make 70 depth decisions per day. So that is a depth decision, like what will you have for breakfast, what route will you take to work, for instance. And we know the further through the day that a person goes through, the less willing they are and less able they are to make good and reasoned and well-informed decisions. And actually, there are many, many different examples of this. We have to be incredibly careful about how we do it. In the average grocery store, there's anything from 1,500 to 27,000 different options. And in many cases, that's what they are getting wrong. There is just so much choice, and it leads to an analysis paralysis.
I like that. Wow. Okay, yep. So from now on, 3 choices, no more, right? But you need to hit
absolutely no more than 3, and 3 tends to be the magic number. It's almost like you're guiding them up a ramp, and in position number 3, position number 1 is often a disappointment. You will never align with whatever their preconceived expectations were of the solution that they hoped that you would present to them in that original pitch, so never place it in position number 1. Position number 2 is used as a point of education. They're using it to get a sense of the scope and scale of the solutions that you're talking about, but they tell themselves that they'd be really bad decision makers if they made a decision so early. So by the time you get to number 3, there are many psychological reasons why we know that happens to be the sweet spot, but ultimately the rule of 3 matters. But also there's a thing inside the human brain: the less we have to process, the easier it is for us to get it across the line. Now, one thing I will say is, for those of our viewers who have a complex array of products, you might say, well, we can't reduce it down to 3. Okay, I understand that, but James, everyone should consider, can you group them then into a top, middle and bottom group, a gold, a silver, a bronze, a premium, a moderate and an accessible level, and then underneath that you could have multiple streams, because then if they're choosing first of all between the tiers and then underneath between the detailed products, then that is 2 small decisions rather than 1 big decision, and that tends to help.
I think that's a really nice solution to that, the idea of grouping them to make sure you stick within the rules of 3. Nice. Okay, so that's number 10 and number 8. I'm mindful that you've got a huge amount of value to share right here, and are we going to fit it in within the episode? I don't know. Stay tuned.
Oh, don't worry, James. We can do an episode 2. We've got, I mean, this is a pandemic. I've definitely got the time.
Good. Okay, right. Managing expectations there for the viewers. But with that said, let's find out what is that number 7.
I absolutely love the power of herds, and there's a great principle called social proof or herd mentality consensus. And let me tell you a story about how I originally discovered this. In my TV show in Ireland, we tried a really simple experiment. We got one person to stand in the middle of Covent Garden with their arms crossed, looking at the tip of a building, at nothing. James, within 9 minutes, we had 12 people standing with them, looking at nothing. We said, okay, well, look, let's see if we can get more people to stick around, to hang around. We asked those people to hang around, and they said, yes, we're happy to do it. Some of them said, well, I'm not involved in your little experiment. I had an appointment to stand here. No, you didn't. But anyway, within a few minutes, we had over 20 people standing at this point. Now, at this moment, we noticed 2 tourists were taking pictures of the top of a building. One of them tweeted the picture saying, there's a guy, he's going to jump. There was nothing. Shortly after that, some taxi drivers complained, saying that we were blocking up the pavement, which is not like them. Taxi drivers are usually such kind, warm, caring individuals. But the fact is, as human beings, we want to do what most people are doing. And this was an amazing example of social proof or herd mentality, and it's something that has been explored so deeply in the research into psychology. Now, before I talk about the application to marketers, one of the seminal pieces of research in this, I got to apply myself in my first ever job, James, in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever been. DuPont Circle is a stunning and beautiful location. I worked in a jury's hotel, and one of my first ever jobs was, the project that I was put on was to reduce cost. I realized this is a business hotel. In other words, people arrive Monday and they leave Friday, and they're getting fresh towels every day. Now, just to be clear here, these people don't need fresh towels every day, James. I don't need fresh towels every day. You're not using fresh towels every day. Are you joking me? In my house, my towels are crawling themselves to the laundry basket. I'm growing penicillin on the radiator in my ensuite at this point. But I knew if we could get people to reuse the towels, it would save us a fortune and it would be good for the environment too. And a team of researchers many years earlier had tested rewording the card to get more people to reuse their towels. And all they did was, instead of saying, please help the environment by reusing their towels, they changed it to say, most guests choose to help the environment by reusing their towels. That's it, most guests. And the minute that they did that, it skyrocketed uptake in the program. Now, why was that the case? Because when you're standing there reading that little card, James, you say to yourself, well, I'm most people, and you want to do what most people are doing. And this is the real science behind so many extraordinary principles. Of course, we know that it works really well inside hotels, but I do a huge amount of work as well with the big 4 consultancy firms. You know, all of the ones that have letters in their names. And at the start of every month, they send out an email to all of their employees saying 81% of you haven't got this report in and 75% of you haven't got your KPI numbers in. Now, think about this, James. At the start of every month, when you open up your email inbox and the first message that you see is, well, 70% haven't got that done and 80% haven't got that done and I'm expected to do it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for a Starbucks. Because if most people aren't doing it, why on earth would you? And so we need to be really careful about how we use this. Now, of course, this is the real science behind testimonials. This is why beginning, middle, and end, every pitch that you have, B2B or frankly B2C, must always mention those applications, always mention those cases. It must always enable and empower your sales message through storytelling, because they really do make an extraordinary difference. And I can give you a great example of this. I got an inquiry many years ago now from an engineering firm. They asked me to pitch for a piece of work, and I sent them a great proposal, James. I had all of my good testimonials from Apple and RBS and the New York Stock Exchange, all of these clients that I've worked with for years. And I thought, well, I'm clearly going to get this. And the proposal went in, James, and I didn't hear back from them. And I followed up. I didn't hear back again. And my CRM followed up, and then I followed up. Never heard back from them at all. I couldn't understand why. I was so upset about it at the time. And then I bumped into the MD, actually he was the CEO, and he was the one who had emailed me directly about the piece of work. And I said, hey, his name was Declan. I mean, it's the first time a Declan has ever achieved anything. And I said, hey, Declan, why did I not get that piece of work? You contacted me about it. And he said, oh, well, yeah, you sent through all your case studies and you've never worked in engineering before, so we just didn't think you were a good fit. And I suddenly realized what an idiot I had been. I had used the wrong testimonials. I had used the testimonials that impress me, but not the ones that would actually speak to him. So here are the rules around this social proof technology. So the first thing is many matters. You must have volume. So the more testimonials you have, the better. And some people say that these testimonials get better like wine, not like bread. They get better with age, not worse with age. So the more you collect them, the more you store them, and the more you sort them, the more likely they are to be successful. Now, once you've got them, that's when you should start to tabulate and structure them. Put them in a database and group them. Group them in terms of industry, in terms of budget size, even in terms of geographic location. And people don't think geographic location matters, but it really can do. I know one digital media service, James, who when you're calling up to cancel, let's say you're calling from the Birmingham area and you want to cancel your television package, then they make sure that your call is routed to a person that has the same accent as you, because you're about 8 to 11% more likely to stay with them, even though you want to leave, if the person speaks exactly like you, because you feel this sense of similarity and commonality. So by grouping them together, first of all, many matters, so volume matters. Second of all, similarity matters, but many similar ones are the ones that apply. Now, that client that I spoke to, he thought that I had no experience in the engineering or manufacturing space. Of course, that was nonsense. I just used the wrong testimonials. So we really must group them together. Now, in that hotel towel example, there is one other layer that improved its success. And as a second level of research, they didn't just say most guests who stay in this room reuse their towels. Instead, the initial version is most guests choose to reuse their towels. But a second layer that they added to it was to say most guests who stayed in this room. So that is the many and similar principle. So lots of people just like you, because they've stayed in this room. And that increased the uptake of the towel reuse again, because you're standing there and you're thinking, someone who stood here just like me. It removes that anonymity, and it also makes it easier for us to make that decision, because when we see the herd moving in a certain way, we want to move. And by the way, folks, if any of you have never visited Ireland before, then please do come. This is a live feed from one of our busiest roads at the moment. As you can tell, it's very busy. And James, loads of marketers use this very successfully. This is why when you log on to one of those big shopping sites to buy clothes pegs, because that's what we're all after at the moment, underneath it'll say, 3 people who bought this have also bought these 2 items. That means that it increases our likelihood of making a discretionary spend that under other circumstances we probably wouldn't have done, James. And the freakiest one of all, James, if you have ever been logged into your Facebook account and then at any point in the weeks after logged on to Ticketmaster, Ticketmaster is incredibly tricky and incredibly clever. What Ticketmaster will do is tell you that, oh, hey, you want to buy tickets for Michael McIntyre's show? Did you know that 6 of your friends are already going to it? They use retargeting very smartly and the Facebook pixels. It's a really clever application. But what they don't realize is, I don't really like most of my Facebook friends. So if I see that they're going to be at the gig, James, there's every chance I'm going to try and pick a different night. I also can't help but think that Ticketmaster and Facebook have accidentally revealed all manner of dishonesty and impropriety, as a spouse might log on to, in a well-meaning way, buy tickets for their special other half. And it says that, oh, turns out that your other half is already going to this. And when you check the diary, it's on a night that they've told you that they're at a conference. But the power of the herd really does matter. That's why we need these case studies. That's why we need these the feedback as much as possible. And let me tell you what I have realized about most professional B2B marketers. They will typically take a piece of feedback if it arrives in their inbox, if they get it. Most GMs don't institutionalize, structure, and systemize the process of asking for it. In my CRM, we have 6 steps that gets every contract to close 1, but we have 11 more steps to make sure that we get the testimonial. Testimonial is like catnip to potential customers, so we must fight for them to make sure that we get it for every single contract we deliver. And we must also accept that if for some reason we don't get a testimonial for a piece of work, then there's a chance we've probably done something wrong.
I think I might need to quote you in the future on that. Testimonials are catnip to customers. Is that the exact wording you used just there?
That's my one, yeah, absolutely. If this was a different event, I might have said it's heroin, but let's stick with catnip for now. But it's so powerful. And oftentimes when we get them, we don't share them. So they sit in our inbox. We don't structure or database them. Really, if you log on to any website, on my site, you simply cannot navigate around my website and not see the testimonial that I got from Apple. I make sure that it is everywhere. James, if I could get permission to tattoo that logo on my forehead, I would do it. And that's because I know the power of that testimonial for customers. But as B2B marketers, we're often really busy. We often find it challenging. We hope that that's an admin marketer's point of view, not a senior marketer's job. But if we let those things drift, then we are losing out on potential sales all the time.
Number 7, testimonials then. I love that. Wow. So if you just joined us, by the way, welcome along. We're here live with David Mead in Belfast. There we go. And then you got confused with the other big city in Ireland. So David Mead live from Belfast right now. We're talking about the top 10 hottest psychological techniques that you can use to upskill and power up your B2B marketing. If you've got a question, by the way, that you would like to ask, please do put it in the comments section, and in between the 1 to 10 techniques, I will put that to David, ask for clarification, or indeed ask for maybe a use case example that might be particularly relevant to you. Right, with that said then, so let's do number 6.
Absolutely, and I will echo that, folks. If you have a specific application question about any of these principles, please don't hesitate to put them inside the comment box. Ultimately, our time together is only worth doing if we make sure that we actually do something with it. Now, I want to give you a little bit more detail on the decision-making less is more principle that we talked about a little bit earlier. But before we do, I want to talk about objections. Think about the last time that a client told you something that you don't do as well as another provider. Imagine for a moment you're talking about who you are and they have been really honest and they have said there's something that you don't do as well as someone else that we're already working with. It could be the incumbent provider or it could be someone else that they're looking at alongside you. Where do you talk about that perceived weakness? Is it more persuasive to do it at the beginning or of the conversation or the pitch or at the end? And by the way, we're talking about a fundamental weakness here. We're not talking about thinking, I'm not really sure if you're a good fit. Maybe they think that you are much too big to handle their boutique style client account. Maybe they think that you're too small and they're big and they need someone that's got lots of resources and lots of agility. So where do we talk about this perceived weakness? Well, the answer is really quite simple. If someone gives you the gift of feedback and telling you that they think that you're not a good fit for XYZ reason, you need to get that out of the gate. You need to cover that as early as possible in your pitch to lance that balloon. Otherwise, what's happening is you're holding your thumb over the hole in the water balloon and just hoping that it doesn't come out at some point at the end. So start your pitch with this objection that you have been gifted. And I realize this is counter to conventional wisdom, because many people say, no, sell them on a sizzle first and then talked about the practicalities at the end. But we know that it's a little bit like selling a car. If you walk into a car yard and someone says, James, I've got the car for you. This was one driver. They were in their 70s. It's only got 12 miles on the clock. It's only 8 weeks old. It's an immaculate car. It's cheap to run, cheap to look after. And you know what? The person who bought it didn't even drive it. They just kept it in their front driveway to keep books in the back seat. This is the car for you. Now, if I start to try and sell that to you for a bargain basement price because it's got no mileage, it's basically brand new, what starts to happen? You start to retreat, you start to recoil, you start to think, no, this is not a good deal. There is some disaster coming here. There's clearly 2 dead bodies in the boot. I know it. Now, look, I'm coming from Northern Ireland, so there very well might be. So the question is, how do we make sure that we do this effectively? Because if, let's say, you sell, and then at the end they find that there's something unusual about this car, something different about it, it's been in an accident of some sort, that it undermines not only that sales conversation, but anecdotally, in my experience, in many cases, it can undermine the entire relationship up until that point. So I want you to cast your mind back to the 1970s when everyone talked about this trusted advisor status, when they referred to individuals who had an individual seat at the board table of their client. If you can achieve a trusted advisor status, it massively transforms your relationship and the DNA of the connection that you have with your clients, leads and prospects. So by starting with the bad news, you look like the most honest, reliable, transparent, trustworthy person. You build a connection that no one else can because they're unwilling to talk about the tough stuff. Your customers want to deal with an individual who will lance a boil whenever possible, and it means that you become a point of information. You stop becoming someone who's just trying to flog the latest idea or the latest solution, and instead you become someone that they want to pick up the phone to talk about things that aren't even within your commercial relationship remit. So always deal with the bad news as early as possible. But remember, of course, make sure that you are balancing it. Make sure that whatever that feedback is, perhaps it's around size, perhaps it's around scale, agility, or maybe it's sector experience. If you're a B2B marketer and you're pitching into pharma and you've never worked in that space before, well, then they might say, well, look, you've got no experience here. You're not used to the compliance and the governance issues that we have. Well, then balance that by saying, look, I just want to hit this out because I know it'll be top of mind for you. I know you're mindful of the fact that we haven't worked in this pharma space before, but we believe that that gives us a brand new, fresh eyes, an innovative approach. We're not coming in with any hangovers, with any baggage of the industry, of the sector. And for that reason, we believe that what we're about to tell you is an outstanding approach to the messaging that you'd like to create this year. So James, wherever possible, always deal with the tough stuff first.
Get it out of the way. I like that. In relation to the last point there, on number 7, Kevin Gillespie has come in with a question he'd like to put to you. So he asks, how do you combat the BDM that always comes back with, my customers don't do testimonials, so I'm not going to ask? Any tips on changing their mindset?
Well, yeah, absolutely. First of all, they're wrong. It's not true. The BDM is not being honest with you. They're either not trying or they're not trying hard enough. That's answer number 1, Kevin. And answer number 2, and by the way, with a name like Kevin Gillespie, I can't help but think that if you told him he'd do it, Kevin, you sound aggressive from my point of view. You sound like an aggressive, angry man. But let me give you my examples of this. If you were to wander around my website, you will find testimonials from Facebook, Google, Apple, New York Stock Exchange, Harvard. Every single one of those organizations as policy will not give you a testimonial. They say they do not endorse, they do not suggest, they do not recommend. And I've got testimonials from them all. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for that. The first thing is, in many cases when I asked for it, I didn't get one, but I kept going. I took them for a lot of coffees. I took them for a lot of lunches. In the case of the Apple testimonial, it took nearly 3 years for me to get it. But wasn't it worth 3 years worth of lunches and coffees to get a testimonial from the greatest brand in the world? It simply is not true when a company says, whether it is because of policy or not, that they don't give testimonials. You're simply talking to the wrong person, or you haven't asked in the right way. It must always be asked for with authenticity and sincerity. And it should also be linked to something that will be useful for them as well. Because maybe they have worked on a particularly innovative program of some sort for you, an innovative approach or solution. Well, then why don't you suggest to them, look, we'd love to get a testimonial from you. Part of the reason for that is this was such a great project to work on. We want to enter it in for a national award. It'll really showcase you. It'll showcase us. So by instilling that sense of reciprocity, which is a principle that we will get to either in this episode or in it's looking like the follow-up episode, then that really does instill and increase your likelihood of getting it. But Kevin, I don't accept that they don't do testimonials. It's either not true, they're either lying to you, or they're not trying hard enough, or maybe they're just not being creative. If they're serious, if your team member is seriously telling you that 100% of their customers do not give testimonials, then have them call me.
That's a sterling answer. Nice. Kevin, hope that's brilliantly answers your question right there. And yeah,
can't help but think that Kevin is immediately going to organise an appraisal with that employee.
Yes. Hopefully good things will come of that, though. There'll be a nicely fired up marketing team now going to battle. Sort of, I'm picturing, what's that film with Mel Gibson in Scotland? Braveheart.
Freedom!
Yeah, except the chant, the call will be testimonials! Right there. There we go. You got a giant thumbs up. Great advice. Love the authenticity, says Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. I imagine David's appreciative of that. You know what?
And keep your questions coming, folks. Always happy to apply them wherever you might have the opportunity.
You touched on a point there. We are at, in fact, in overtime now, to use a sports analogy of the show. And crikey, we've promised 10, and we're going to, at a push, be able to do 5. I think at this point we do need to say yes, we are going to have David Mead Part 2 on the 414 at a later date, possibly at the start of next year. That might be cool. Kick off the...
great way to start the year.
Yes.
And, truthfully, honestly, James, 10 is only starting, only scratching the surface. There are so many of these principles that are easy to take away. They are accessible and they are well within reach of any marketer. And every marketer actually knows them, generally speaking, either anecdotally or experientially. But it's always great to have that little reminder and that kick up the backside to say, oh, I know I should be doing that, so let's go do it.
Yes, it's the difference between, knowing what to do and doing what you know. Love that one.
That is a t-shirt waiting to happen.
Isn't it just? We should sell that. Right, let's quickly jump to psychological technique number 6 and see how we get on here. Right, over to you.
Superb. So I mentioned earlier about less is more, and the fewer choices that we have for an individual to make, oftentimes it is much easier for them to do it. I mentioned that briefly, so I want to make sure that we cover it off with some evidence. And the reason that retail is a great place to test this, and I know it isn't a B2B example, but stay with me. Retail is a great place to test this because we know that in the average store there are truly tens of thousands of possible options and solutions, and it can be very difficult for a marketer of any kind to make their product stand out. But the truth is, if you're pitching for a national account of any kind, then they may have tens of providers coming in and pitching to them as well. So the challenge is very similar there. So there is a really simple study that I think it's important that you all know as marketers because it makes this so clear and so simple. It's one of the most reported and often cited in the psychology of influence, and it involves some samples of jam in a beautiful Whole Foods retail establishment in the United States. It was tested over many weeks in different stores, and put simply, when guests were entering into the retail space, there was a table that had either 24 beautiful jams and preserves for them to sample, and if they liked it, then buy, versus 6 jams and preserves for them to sample and then buy. Now, my question to all of you listening at home at the moment, tuning in, which one do you think sold better? Now, we know that we love choice, don't we? That's why Heinz has its 57 varieties, and by the way, today it has many hundreds of varieties. That's why we all love going to weddings. I mean, we're not going for the nuptials, are we? No, we're not. We're going for the buffet. I can assure you, if you invited me to your wedding, I was more interested in the chicken wings than the wedding rings. Choice is something that really makes us feel like we are, it makes us feel like we are just living. So when there were 6 versus 24 options, if there were 24 options of jam, when someone tasted it, the conversion rate was 3%. Now, you might say, that's a really terrible conversion rate, 3%, but remember, this is discretionary spend, James. When people entered this store, they had no intention of buying these items, of buying these products. It was just plonked in front of them in the reception space. So 3% is, when compared to nothing, is absolutely worth doing. However, when there were only 6 options for them to choose from, the results were massive. There was a 30% conversion rate. Now, that is an extraordinary result and an extraordinary finding. The reason it's extraordinary is that's a 10 times increase in conversion for actually reducing the amount of options that you have. And there are so many different examples of this. Head & Shoulder massively cut their product range down and increased their sales and increased their productivity. The Golden Cat Company is famous for it. They cut the bottom 10% of their products, and when they did, their profits jumped by 87%. So I would really encourage people now to shrink their offering wherever possible, shrink their messaging to make it easier for people to make decisions. Now, I know we briefly touched on that earlier, but I wanted to make sure that people had the evidence behind it.
That was a nice thing. You know what, I was just about to mention on that how that's linking quite beautifully to your rule of 3, which you covered earlier. Nice. Kevin Gillespie's got to come back, and he's said that he'll hold you to this idea that in fact, this is the pair of us actually. He's going to hold us to the promise that his team's going to go forward, like the scene from Braveheart, to go and successfully collect testimonials for his company. I like that. He says they won't know what hit them. Wow,
fantastic.
Like it. Right, here we go. Let's do one more then. We'll do number 6. And yes, as promised then, we will do part 2 of the show in the new year with David. So for now then, top psychological technique number 6.
Fantastic. Let's go. And by the way, once we finish this one, James, I'd like to try something with you. I want to see if I can persuade you to do something, think of something. So let's just make sure that we leave 3 or 4 minutes at the end for that. Now, think about the last time that you talked about your product. What do you do? Are you talking about the features, the functions, the benefits, the impact? How about talking about the weaknesses, the things that you don't do well, the things that separate you from the people who are better than you? One psychological principle that has been really well researched but is dramatically, massively and shamefully underused in marketing, not just B2B but also in B2C, is called the pratfall effect. Ultimately, the pratfall effect is about not being afraid to be bad, to emphasize how good you are. Now, there were some really great experiments done by Richard Shotton around this, and he tested it in many different ways. Many researchers have as well, but this is one great example. For those of you all watching live now, and for those of you watching in the recording afterwards, ask yourselves, which cookie do you like best? The one on the left or the one on the right? Let us know inside the comments. Well, the research and the evidence shows that overwhelmingly 66% of people preferred the imperfect cookie. They preferred the one that looked a little bit rougher. Now, why is that the case? Because actually we are drawn to things that are not perfect. It's one of the reasons why over the course of the last few years you will notice there's been a huge movement towards ugly vegetables. Do you remember there was uproar of people throwing away nobbled potatoes and broken and bendy carrots? I think it was even linked to the EU and Brexit at one point. And that created a movement towards people enjoying and embracing imperfection, because perhaps in imperfection there is an artisanal nature. Perhaps there is a uniqueness to it. And the fact is, both cookies were actually exactly the same cookies. The only thing they did was trim the edge. If you look at it, the chocolate chip is in exactly the same location. They are fundamentally identical. And many brands have used this powerfully. The picnic bar has said that it is so ugly, it's the reason that wrappers were invented. One ski slope in particular has started taking their terrible TripAdvisor reviews and using them in their adverts, because this person said that it's too advanced. I've heard that it was a tough mountain, but this one is ridiculous. It's like every trail was a steep chute and littered with free wells. Now, that seems like a negative review, but actually for the right customer that really speaks to who they are and excites them about it. So we need to think about how we can cleverly use these perceived weaknesses. One of the most amazing examples of this, of course, came from Avis Car Hire. who for years, and this has been in many cases named one of the most creative ad campaigns of all time. Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars, so we try harder. This is an amazing message about how important it can be for us to accept that we may not be the best, but we're always striving. And of course that matters when it comes to selling physical products as well, but it also matters when you're selling yourself as an individual or a professional. Did you know, for instance, that if you mention a weakness of some sort about yourself and your skills and capabilities during a job interview, you're actually significantly more likely to be more appealing to the panel? Because it's seen as a type of honesty, a type of transparency. So what you need to do is take the potential and perceived weaknesses of your product, your service, or your solution and try and turn it into a benefit. Are you number 2 or number 3? Does that mean that you work harder? Some might say that you're too small to take on this contract, then say that that means that you get dedicated account management and support. You don't just get account manager du jour. You don't just get whoever happens to be available. You'll get one person that will work with you, not just this month, but they'll work with you this year and over the course of the next 3 years. The pratfall effect is about taking the things that might look like weaknesses and re-shining them so that they actually become a positive and separate you from competitors inside the space.
I think that's a great one to finish on, and also particularly powerful. I can really see how that would make a difference, and I like that you back it up with fact and science as well. Always a good.
Yeah, I think we absolutely have to. And look, James, I promised that I would try and persuade you to do something. Now, you did not know I was going to ask you to do this, and that was intentional because I didn't want anyone to think that we have set anything up. All right, so for fun, James, let's see if I can influence you. Got an old watch here. It hasn't worked for years, but there's even sellotape on the back of it. Now, for fun, I'm going to set this watch to a time. Now, it's really important that everybody tuning in and watching knows we genuinely haven't set this up, and you can see the fear in James' eyes because he has no idea what's about to happen. I'm going to set this to a time, and then I'm going to hang it like this, so hopefully you can tell that I cannot get near the knob, so I cannot adjust the time on it. I'm just going to hold it to the side there so you can see me, so the camera focuses. Now imagine for a moment, James, I'm going to see if you can work out what this time is. I think I know the time that you're about to say because I've tried all episode to put a time inside your head. Now the rule is, you must not go with a favorite time, a lucky time. You must not go with a time that means anything. So I'm going to ask you to randomly name an hour now from 1 to 12. What hour? Go.
5.
5. Okay, that's not a favorite time or a lucky time.
No. That's genuinely.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you to name a random minute now as well for me, please. So you could go from 1 to 59. You could go 0 if you like, but obviously that's not terribly creative. You can go as specific as you like. What minutes?
19.
19. Okay, and are you genuinely happy that this has just popped inside your head, that we haven't pre-prepared anything and you didn't know this was going to happen?
100%, and yeah, 100%.
Are you nervous?
I hope I haven't screwed it up, but we will see.
Look, I can assure you, I don't try these things unless I know they're going to work. If you listened to every single word that I said, then I knew that you would say the right time. I'm going to put this as close as I can. Hopefully you can see. Hopefully you can... Oops, it slightly lost its focus there. My apologies. And that's well done, James. So I hope that you get a suitable round of applause in the comments. Pretty darn close, I'm sure you'll agree. And maybe we'll try another one in our second episode.
But well done. That was very cool. Need to shout out to Bill Nelson, by the way. He was briefly jumping in on your jam example. I think he was keen to show support for that one. Hey, Bill.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Wow.
So, look, thanks for all the comments, everyone. Tell your friends and colleagues we'll be back for a brand new episode in the new year.
Indeed. David, thank you so much. This has been an experience, and I really hope everyone watching has really got something from that. And yes, sure enough, we will complete on our promise by getting David back in the new year, because this is something that I think is really important for marketers, B2B marketers, to be able to up our game, because things like this make a difference. So there we go. Well, hey, David Mead, live from Belfast. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're a gentleman and a star. And indeed, if you've enjoyed watching, then, and if you're not subscribed already, then web address on screen, there we go, www.the414.net for all subscription options and previous episodes. So the 414 is for you if you are a professional B2B marketer, whether you work in-house at a company or agency side, or indeed if you're a company executive with a hands-on role in your company's sales and marketing endeavors. This show is for you because every week I get to speak with some of the greatest and most interesting minds in B2B marketing so that you can directly expand and enhance your professional knowledge each and every week. There we go, 414.net. My name's James Rostance, and I'll see you here same time next week.